be very interesting to hear what Mr. Nasser would say about this, and especially that you mentioned those spaces and those public spaces. And what do you think in your perspective, or what do you have as a comment on it?
I think the comment is actually a bit more general than just looking at architecture as a mean to have people experience certain spaces, or even urban design to experience certain spaces. From our point of view, at least with the practice that both Joaquin and I lead, we always keep asking clients questions. And these questions are normally provocative questions that raise their eyebrows, probably these types of questions that they're never used to hearing, whether it was a real estate developer or an individual owner of a residence, or even a doctor that we're dealing with in any of our projects. And these questions are normally, how do you clean the floor? Or who takes out the garbage? Or where do you place your shoes outside the mosque? They're very basic questions, but these questions, no one asked them, and no one asked them to find a solution in these type of questions. And I think we're in a platform right now where we all have so many questions to ask, and we all are part of the answers to those questions. Unfortunately, we've lived, or our society has lived in a mean that the government seems to be the only mean of asking and the only mean of answering. And unfortunately, that hasn't led us to anywhere. Where we are right now is we're at a point where we have to ask the questions, and we have to be participating in answering these questions. And when I say we, I mean as a group, and I'm not saying we as an individual. And that is the dilemma that we as a society keep having. And when we're talking about the society, we're talking about a society that grew from the mid to late 40s to where we are right now over time, with very limited cultural view to, if we're talking about, for example, Europe, it took them centuries to get to where they are culturally. Right, for us, we actually got to where we are literally in a very rapid way. And we haven't stopped to look back. And we always refer to the history as something that we loved, and it was very dear to us, and it was fantastic. And to be honest, none of us in this room know anything about that history. And I think we actually shouldn't look at the history, we should look at the future, and we start asking these questions for the future.
Can you just speak louder and kind of get the mic closer? And in regards of looking back at history, what I wanted to ask Mr. Joaquin as well is, I knew you were involved with renovating the Dutch State Museum.
The Rijksmuseum.
Yeah. And I think that's very interesting. It's an interesting metaphor, because a museum, to me, personally, and I think to all of us, we know that it's one of the greatest cultural hubs in a country could hold. And to actually be in charge of renovating such a space isn't a very easy task, without losing the essence of the space itself. And I think that's very close to actually having a cultural shift in a society or in a community without losing the essence of the culture. So I just wanted to ask you, how did that experience can link to how this cultural shift is bound to happen without losing the essence of the culture?
You are putting me in a very difficult situation. That's the first thing. The project of the Rijksmuseum was extremely complex in many ways. So I can be talking like hours. So I try to cut it short, but if not, you have to cut me. The issue is there were so many. There's already why there was a change on the museum is because the entity by itself it needed a change. Why? Because the world is changing. The museums before they were funded by the state, now they are funded by themselves practically. The state found something, so they are becoming like a merchandise machine by itself. So, but at the same time, what you said is it had to be linked with the society, especially when you are talking about a national museum. And when the Rijksmuseum for Holland is the biggest museum and most important museum, in which the Rembrandt and Vermeer collection, the most important Vermeer collection is there. So, I mean, it's an icon, and it's really okay, the icon of Holland. It represents Holland by itself. But talking about collectivity, which is a good example of how far collectivity could reach, then we could, if you want, extend more about the museum. But also this collectivity has certain risks I want to point out. The museum is divided by a passage, okay? A passage which is a street, and it's public space. The project, okay, proposed, and that one, there was an international competition that I was working at that time by Cruz y Ortiz, the Spanish architects. They took over that space, and they moved the bicycles on the side of that space. There are 3 bays, so they took the central bay and moved the bicycles who were running in the center of the bay to the side. Okay, it was such only that statement, after winning competitions and 3 years development the project thing, it was such a thing that the project stopped. And we are talking about a project of 375 million euros. Okay, the project literally stopped. Why? Because there's an association, local association of the district, the bicycle association, that they say this is public space and that belongs to us. So this is an example of the other extreme where we are standing right now. This association, I think there are 300, 200 people, no more. Okay, but that tells you a bit also how far, okay, this kind of liaison with the society could be at the same time very risky, and in which there has to be also a political, we could say, base that steers certain process, especially when we are talking about design. Here we are in the opposite, and like for instance in Spain right now, we are in the opposite, in which there is a discontent about certain political and cultural issues, and the people are responding to it, okay? Are responding especially through social networks, because it's the biggest or the fastest way to interconnect between each other. And I think that, I think right now this is the beginning, and a big change will come, but a big change socially, culturally, even politically, that we don't know. When we talk about the museum, again, it's more important because it refers to history. No? The Rijksmuseum is a 19th century museum, and okay, there were a lot of connotations related to it. But at the same time, I don't know, I don't think we should be scared of these changes, no? And refer always to that history. You know, as Nasser was mentioning, like, we all think that the best was the past, no? And okay, we are who we are, there's a history behind us, we cannot neglect it, but at the same time, we are here to operate in a different way. And right now, neither our parents nor our grandparents, I cannot tell you, but even myself, okay, from 40 years old, 20 years ago, it was a different world where we were living. So I see my kids right now, how they interact with iPads, and we couldn't imagine 10 years ago. You know, we were discussing the other day, Nasser was asking me, have you seen the change? I started coming to Kuwait in 2004. Have you seen the change of Kuwait? Definitely, you know. So I think we should build it up from it, you know, and not be scared of that change, although that liaison with the history exists by itself.
That's what I was trying, to get also across, is that we can't lose the essence of the history. We can't lose the essence of our culture, even with history. And you mentioned something very important, is the risks that come along with the change, or let me call it the shift. I think it's a perfect answer we can get from Dr. El Anoud with her expertise in this matter, where the line should be drawn, where the difference between it being a positive shift and making sure it does not turn into a commotion. where actually it remains, the efforts remain towards a positive shift, and just ensuring that, rather than being turning, into a commotion or something that is, negative in a political matter or in any other perspective other than what it's supposed to be.
Okay, well, I'll try to tackle that very deep question, starting from an initial point that that's better? Yeah, that was brought up again and again here. So a lot of the discussion was about the individual versus the community, and especially through creative mediums. So what we say, and I have a background in activism and women's rights, and what we say all over the world when we talk about women's rights is the personal is the political. And I think we can't escape that even in this part of the world, the changes that are happening. Any creative medium is going to be both autobiographical and also colored by local politics. We live in a culture in the Arab world, in the GCC especially, where there are a lot of absolutes and there are a lot of limits, if you like, to expression. And sometimes that pushes artists and architects and other creatives into a place where they suffer from cultural dysmorphia. They feel that they're rejected by the mainstream, that they can't connect with their own cultures. And I have to include the very large expat community that we have here, and they have to find an expression for themselves within this very restricted, if you like, medium of expression. But then we get beautiful results out of this, such as Edge of Arabia and other movements from this sort of restrictive element that can then find a form of expression to go beyond that. Now, how can we stop it from becoming a commotion? I don't think that any artistic medium can be controlled. It's the theory of chaos. Once you create it, it becomes a monster, for lack of a better word, and then it evolves into a life of its own. What we have to be aware of when we're talking about community initiatives, that a lot of people have some sort of political agenda at the end of the day, and then they might usurp this spontaneous and beautiful project to serve their own objectives. So art and architecture and the growth of the creative, yes, it's been helped a great deal by the open space we have in the virtual media. But here, in reality and in the tangible, we still have a lot of restrictions and a lot of cultural interpretations that we have to be aware of. We have to respect our environment and try to find a change, a shift within that environment that's both innovative and also authentic. And I think that's what everybody in this panel, probably everybody interested in this room, is struggling with today.